excited to have Crystal Heath of Veterinary Medicine, doctor here. And so Dr. Heath is a very well-known veterinarian from Berkeley, California. She's a graduate of UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine. She's also the founder of Vet Harmony, and her clinical practice is primarily focused on shelter medicine and high-quality, high-volume spay and neuter. Dr. Heath is also a co-founder of Our Honor, an organization focused on creating more ethical systems within the field of veterinary medicine. Tonight, we are very excited to welcome Dr. Heath to speak to us about the ethical considerations of dog experimentation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Heath.
Hey all, thank you for having me. I hope you can hear me okay. Let me know if it's too soft. I have a very soft voice and I can't hear myself right now. But yeah, I'm Dr. Crystal Heath. This little guy on the first slide is my dog Flash, and I'll talk about him a little bit later too. But yeah, we're here to ask the question, do current systems adequately protect dogs? What are the barriers that currently exist to change? And tonight we'll go through kind of the regulations and the guidelines laboratories have to follow and discuss whether we think these are adequate. Then we're going to look inside an actual accredited facility. But the fact is that currently dogs are used for the benefit of humans. In many cases, we use them in experiments that we would consider unethical to do in human beings. Many of us here might have differing opinions about whether those of us who are in a position of power should be able to use those who lack power in our society for our own personal benefit. And my own personal view is that we should all work for the best interests of others, no matter their positions in current dominance hierarchies. But no matter what your current position is, I think we can all discuss these issues kind of openly and honestly. No matter who you're discussing with, there's no need to vilify the other side. And I think that that's kind of the important vibe we should have going forward. And then she already introduced me, but my business is Vet Harmony, and we provide veterinary care in communities via pop-up wellness clinics. Our Honor is my nonprofit that I founded, and it was started because I experienced an episode of bullying and retaliation for voicing ethical concerns. And then after this happened, a bunch of veterinarians reached out to me and said they had experienced the same thing. And we started this organization to kind of address this issue of bullying that exists within the profession. And we really have come to see how this is creating a huge barrier to creating change that is really needed in our profession and in science in general. I am a graduate of UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine, and I graduated in 2012. While I was there, I did some research in lab animal medicine, but primarily my focus of my career is on shelter medicine. So I'm going to be talking today from that perspective of shelter medicine, general practice, but also my experience with Our Honor and talking to members of my profession who have faced bullying, retaliation, and vet students who have faced the same thing when they're trying to address the current systems and create change. So for those of you who came late, this is an interactive presentation, and the easiest way to interact is by saving this phone number into your phone, 510-544-8880. And during the presentation, there'll be questions, and you can text in your answers, and your answers will pop up on the screen. The first question, to see if this works, is what best describes you? So I'm going to go to the first whole question. And are you text number 1 if you're not a student, text 2 if you're a pre-vet student, text 3 if you're a pre-med student, 4 a veterinary student, 5 a medical student, or 6 other student. I'll give you guys a few more minutes. Just kind of want to know who I'm talking to. Lots of other students. I'm sad no veterinary students today so far. only one pre-vet student. Oh, looks like a couple of ones still coming in. So the next question is, have you ever worked in a research environment where animals were used? I'll start this poll. The first answer is no, the second is yes in the past, and 3 is I currently do. So a few people who currently do and a few people who did in the past. That's great. Oops. Oh, now I can't go. Oh, it's Chrome. I don't like Chrome. Well, we're just going to stick with this. All right. So currently there are 43,000 dogs used in research. And they're used for testing human drug efficacy, toxicity, developing medical devices, cardiac experiments, in education for dissection and surgical training, quality control for devices. They're bred as models for human diseases like muscular dystrophy. And I'm gonna, regarding the use of dogs in surgical training and in education, I think this is an important topic to really highlight what are some of the barriers to change, because we currently use animals in teaching scenarios when there are clearly ethical alternatives. So I'm going to click on this whole question, and during my talk here, oops, this is not working. Might have to skip this one. Let's see if that works. Oh, it might work. Hi. See if you can, if somebody just wants to post something, just to see if it's working. I don't know if this one's working. But, so terminal surgeries are an interesting subject, and because this is where students are given an animal in their training in veterinary school, and they do a surgery on these animals who are normal, otherwise healthy, and they're being forced to kill them after they're done practicing their surgeries. And this is kind of a relic of the past that still exists. This was thought to be a more humane alternative to what they used to do previously, which was they would have a colony of dogs. They would do multiple surgeries on each dog. They would cut them open, remove a piece of intestine, remove a kidney, sew them back up, wake them up, and a few weeks later another student would come along and cut them open again, do another surgery, take out the uterus, take out another bit of intestine, sew them back up again, they'd heal, and then another student group would come along and do the same thing. After a while, after student complaints, they thought, you know, there's a better way to do this. The better way at that time was to just kill the dogs after surgery, never allow them to wake up, and be done with it. And that still goes on in veterinary schools to this day. And many schools are actually transitioning away from this, but they are facing surprisingly a lot of backlash for doing this. One is Colorado State, who recently gave up its terminal surgery program and faced a great deal of backlash from the ag industry, saying that the students were missing out on an important learning opportunity. These are students who fought against terminal surgeries in their school. The first one is Dr. Britton Hammett McCurry. She worked with the University of Georgia to develop an alternative to the terminal surgery program in her school. This is Dr. Andrew Knight, and he refused to do terminal surgeries in veterinary school in Australia and developed a system to transition towards humane alternatives. This is Dr. Stephanie Fraisel, who was forced to accept an F for refusing to perform a terminal surgery at Auburn University. The faculty scolded her, threatened her with expulsion, and her peers mocked her. She had a panic attack alone on campus, but she graduated and she's thankful that she had the courage to stick with her convictions. And this is Dr. Kirsten Rosenberg. She graduated from the school where I graduated from, UC Davis, and when she was there, she and a group of 3 students decided to be conscientious objectors to terminal surgeries. They decided that they would use a cadaver dog instead, a dog that had already died. All the other student groups were using live dogs that they would then kill after surgery. And these are dogs that were obtained from the shelter. But the year prior, there was a dog named Becky. And Becky was a very nice, sweet, like Australian Shepherd type dog. And the class before said, you know, this is such a nice dog. We really want to save her. We want to adopt her out. And they agreed to save her. So she wasn't killed in that lab the year before. But unfortunately, she went to a home. She got out from her home, ended up back in the shelter, and back into the terminal surgery lab again. And Dr. Rosenberg and the class recognized this dog as Becky, and they were like, we do not want to kill Becky in this lab today. You know, what can we do? The professor said, well, you can give your cadaver dog to another student group and we'll save Becky, but you guys have to take an F for the class for sticking by their morals and values. They'd have to take an F. But they need another group to agree to take their cadaver dog. None of the other groups in that class agreed to take the dog, and Becky was killed that day. And this led to kind of an uproar in the class, and she was called into the dean's office, and the dean begged her not to go to PETA, which she didn't. But I think Kirsten is the reason why I didn't have to do terminal surgeries in vet school at UC Davis. And the reason why I got to adopt my little dog, Flash, because we changed to an access to care model where dogs who need surgery could get the surgeries they needed, and students could learn under the guidance of an experienced surgeon. And students could get the opportunity to see their dogs wake up from surgery and get to manage their pain afterwards, which are kind of the most important parts of surgery. And when I was interviewing for vet school at UC Davis, I was asked by one of my interviewers, so how do you feel about terminal surgeries? And I actually went into vet school thinking that they still did terminal surgeries. I think they were kind of on the fence, and they actually still do at UC Davis. It's an elective program, and they have students kill farm animal species, sheep and pigs. But you don't have to take part of it in order to graduate. You won't have to be forced to fail a class. And I said, it doesn't really make any sense to me why you would do terminal surgery, because you're missing out on this important opportunity to see the animal wake up from surgery and manage their pain. And isn't that the most important part? And they didn't really argue with me. They said, oh, that's a good point, and they kind of moved on. I don't know if that hurt me or helped me in getting into vet school. But yeah, I mean, I see it's just kind of crazy that we entered this profession to help animals, and yet we're being asked to kill them. And this is such a hot button issue in veterinary schools. Nobody wants people like me talking about it. I brought it up on a veterinary message board. I told about Kirsten's story, and I was like, what are other examples of the ways that we have improved veterinary medicine? And I was asking, what schools still do terminal surgeries? And nobody would tell me. They said, Dr. Heath is an animal rights activist. Do not answer that question. So they're afraid for even a colleague to know what schools are still doing terminal surgeries. And I don't think that that's a good path forward if we want to really change systems. And this is just a prime example of kind of the many ways that we stay in these systems that are kind of relics of the past. And it's up to students to kind of to join together and change them. There's so many opportunities here. So I'll just take a drink of water. I'm curious to see if you guys had any thoughts during this. So I'm going to see if I can find my thing. Thoughts on terminal surgeries. Yeah, the technology we have now is good enough to make accurate replicas of animals without using real animals. Very much don't like that terminal surgeries exist. All voices should be heard and a safe space made to share these voices. Yay, testers too. Okay, yeah, why can't they just use cadaver dogs? Yeah, the thing about cadaver dogs I should bring up is it's not really a good alternative because there's something about practicing surgery on a real animal who could potentially feel pain from what you were doing in surgery and who would bleed and whose muscles react when you touch them during surgery. And just getting used to that anxiety of cutting into an animal who is alive is something that a surgeon needs to get used to and needs to appreciate and have a respect for. So just kind of comparing labs and shelters, we're going to kind of go back to laboratory work. Labs and shelters are very similar. We both manage populations of animals. We have both been attacked by animal rights activists. And it's interesting to see the way that animal shelter industry responded to criticisms from the public and animal activists compared to how labs have. And kind of the differences between the two and their response to public scrutiny. So what are regulations and guidelines for each of these? In animal shelters, really, there's no regulations protecting the animals in animal shelters. There's some state and local regulations, but really there's nothing. We ended up creating the guidelines for standards of care in shelter animals, but there's nobody enforcing that really. In labs, there is the Animal Welfare Act, which we'll discuss how strong it is. There's IACUCs, which are Institutional Animal Care and Use Committees. And then there's an extra step that they can go to voluntarily, which is the, what is this? The American, I always forget this acronym, American Association for Accreditation of Laboratory Animal Care. And they can pay money, get inspected, and go this extra step if they desire. So the first thing is the Animal Welfare Act. This was last updated in 1985. It just requires pre-licensing inspections, unannounced compliance inspections, and follow-up inspections after complaints from the public. There are only 120 USDA inspectors for 12,000 facilities. And the Animal Welfare Act is really, as a result, poorly enforced. Enforcement and penalties for not following the Animal Welfare Act have decreased. Many companies and laboratories kind of accept these as the cost of doing business. During 2016 and 2017, there was a 90% drop in civil penalties, and in 2018, the total was only $174,000. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. The Act only describes basic housing requirements, and it's meant not to interfere with any experimentation, and laboratories can carry out any experiments that they want, even if they cause extreme distress, as long as the paperwork is all correct. And the Animal Welfare Act excludes most species. In 2002, after a lot of lobbying, now the only species covered are about 5% of the animals used in research: dogs, cats, rabbits, guinea pigs, hamsters, gerbils, non-human primates, marine mammals, captive wildlife, domestic livestock species used in non-agricultural research. 95% of animals are not covered, and those include rats, mice, fish, and birds. And luckily, though, or I don't know if it's going to make much of a difference, the USDA is thinking about extending those protections to birds, and public comment is being accepted now until the 25th. And so let's just go over kind of the guidelines for care of animals in shelters. And these, since shelters are not regulated, our industry has created their own guidelines after activist pressure. And shelters are not compelled in any way to follow any of these regulations, and many do not. Unfortunately, I work in shelters who do not follow all of these regulations. I still show up and I try to make change, and I can point out the guidelines and try to get them to invest money in the right direction. But yeah, it is aspirational in many cases. And these guidelines, as I said, are a good example of the kind of attitude that an industry needs to have in order to foster positive change. They openly admit to historic problems and are seeking to remedy them. And they say, there have been a growing number of incidents where shelter conditions have caused severe animal suffering and unnecessary death. A growing number of allegations of cruelty have been filed against shelters or sanctuaries for failure to provide adequate and humane care. Lack of acceptable standards of care and failure to recognize or respond to animal suffering has contributed to these cases. And these are the 5 guidelines for what they have in mind when they developed these guidelines. The 5 freedoms, and these are the freedom from hunger and thirst, the freedom from discomfort, the freedom from pain, injury, or disease, the freedom to express normal behavior, the freedom from fear or distress. And let's compare that to, I'll just call it the AALAC or ALAC. What is required by those, and this is the extra step above and beyond. And this is an application that is filled out, and you have to show on paper that you adhere to the 3 primary standards. And these 3 standards, if you read through them all the way through, are very much in conflict with each other. They say different things, and all that's required in order to get accredited is basically a site visit once, and then 1 visit every 3 years. Some believe that these labs should be adhering to a higher standard. Unfortunately, the members of the council who do give this accreditation are researchers themselves, professors of animal science who they themselves do research. Not a single person in the committee is any sort of ethicist or someone advocating on behalf of the animals. To get accreditation, you pay an application fee of $46,000 to $60,000 or more, and then you pay an annual fee of $3,000 to $11,000, depending on how big you are. And because of this annual fee, you can kind of see how they might be motivated to accredit a lot of facilities as sort of a revenue source, but it also, it provides this sort of shroud of protection and legitimacy to these labs. Like, they are adhering to this so-called higher standard. But I love this quote in the guide for the care and use of laboratory animals. It says, using animals in research is a privilege granted by society to the research community with the expectation that such use will provide either significant new knowledge or lead to improvement in human and/or animal well-being. Now, as members of society, are we adequately informed about the care and treatment of animals in labs and the benefit to humans and animals that this research provides? And at what point can we revoke that privilege? And here's one example of kind of the inconsistencies that are in these guidelines. This is just one. One says that open flooring systems such as mesh or grids should not be used for dogs, and another says that the flooring can be perforated or slatted. And we'll watch in the videos that show what kind of standards they're following here, if any. And this is the kind of size requirements that they are requiring for a less than a 15 kg dog, 8 square feet. And this is better than the USDA Animal Welfare Act, which says that they measure the tip of the nose to the base of the tail plus 6 inches squared divided by 144, and that is the minimum square feet. And I'm going to show you what that looks like pretty soon. So this is an example of the cages being used. This is and they also say, like, regarding bedding too, that you can use, they say like wood shavings and other bedding materials can be used on the floors of dog runs and can provide excellent housing for dogs, but the purchase of new and disposable used bedding is costly. Labor involved with cleaning the runs is also increased, as soiled bedding must be scooped out and replaced daily. This is more time consuming than simply hosing feces and urine down the drain. Wood shavings may have a tendency to plug up floor drains, and dogs can ingest them. So you don't necessarily have to use bedding if you adhere to their standards. So this is a dog that is in a cage, and this is in one of the lab animal books by Gerald Silverman. This is more than twice the floor space required. So this means that this dog never has to ever be let out of this cage for exercise. So this dog, this is close up. This dog could spend his entire life in a cage like this, and he is getting adequate exercise. And regarding like sound, the guidelines for the shelter medicine guidelines address the welfare concerns regarding noisy environments, and they suggest ways to address it. The ALAC guidelines don't really say anything about the welfare concerns for the animals. They say the noise produced by the animals in the animal care activities is inherent in the operation of an animal facility. And they also seem to just center kind of the human worker concerns and don't really say anything about the animals, unfortunately. And regarding lighting, here's another inconsistency. One standard says that natural light is ideal for enrichment. Another says that windows create a security risk. And they say that every institution should develop methods for reporting and investigating animal welfare concerns, and employees should be aware of the importance of mechanisms for reporting animal welfare concerns. In the United States, the responsibility for review and investigation of these concerns rests with the institutional official and the IACUC. But how does this play out in reality? This is Carla Cabral. She was an RDT and a research scientist and a manager of a mouse colony at the University of Arizona for 4 years. And going in, she was an advocate for animal research, was good at her job, and worked her way up. But even when she was in a leadership role, she was teased for caring too much about mice. She would cry when they would die in studies, and she tells these stories about the automatic waterers being jammed with bedding, and as a result, hundreds of mice dying in their cages. And this happened repeatedly. She voiced her concern, but really felt like it was going nowhere. She was sickened by how many mice were being used and disposed of, and started to feel like the scientific gains were not worth the suffering and the lives lost. And she then became an animal rights activist. And when I was in school, I was taught that animal rights activists were always outsiders who didn't really know what was going on and what we were talking about, and didn't understand the nature of the work that was being done. And the more I do this work and the more people I come across who are animal rights activists because they worked in the industry and they know it on an intimate level. So the IACUC, this is the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. It was created in 1985 after the amendment to the Animal Welfare Act, and it's meant to oversee and approve protocols of animals used in research, but members are only appointed by the institutional official. Often friends and colleagues of the animal researchers themselves are the ones appointed. There should be at least one veterinarian and one practicing scientist, one non-scientist, and a member of the public or the community. I'm putting black boxes over their faces, just highlight how many people are afraid to talk about and tell their story. I've heard so many stories of people being on IACUCs who were kicked off for voicing ethical concerns and failing to kind of rubber stamp some of these protocols. Those who often voice medical concerns are often removed. They face job losses. Those who are working in alternatives to animal research have a really hard time getting published or presenting their work at conferences. They also fail to get faculty positions at universities, and faculty feel threatened by their work. Universities might miss out on grant funding for animal research. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of problems here with getting those professors. Like, I know really, really brilliant professors who are really advanced in their careers, and I'm shocked that they're scared to tell these stories of the retaliation that they faced in the past. It's like, aren't you, at this point in your career, aren't you pretty assured, like you're pretty well known, you know, if you tell your story, you could really help inspire a lot of younger students to speak up, but they still feel, you know, even in their position, that they cannot speak up about these things. And this is the story of Brianna, who she requested anonymity again for fear of losing her job. And she talks about how many mice she had to needlessly kill because they bred too many, and so she just spent her days, you know, killing all of these mice and what that did to her emotionally. And this is quite a common thing among slaughterhouse workers, among shelter workers, especially. We talk about this a lot in the shelter, how we are charged with caring for animals, and then the emotional trauma we face having to then euthanize them. Dr. Bernard Rowland from Colorado State University said, many research technicians go into this field of animal research to help animals, yet their day-to-day work ends up being the killing of animals, or being complacent and creating pain, distress, disease, and other noxious states demanded by research enterprise. And these rules that ALAC has aren't at all set in stone. In this example, they say that prolonged restraint, including chairing of non-human primates, should be avoided unless it's essential for achieving research objectives and is specifically approved by the IACUC. Article 8 is another example, saying that painful procedures should be performed under general anesthesia unless it's incompatible with the aim of the research. And I just want to bring back the 5 freedoms from the shelter world. How can you have the 5 freedoms in lab animal medicine as it stands today? I don't think that that's possible. So that's where the difference lies between the two. And I hear from my colleagues working in lab animal medicine that their animals are treated so much better than many of the animals treated in the shelters. And, you know, that might be true, you know, at the extremes, but the goals are quite different in each of the 2 industries. This is a drawing of a house, the ideal housing in the shelter guidelines. You have a separate area where they can urinate and defecate, a nice comfy bed, you have toys, you have a visual barrier if they want privacy. And this is what that looks like in kind of your standard shelter. This is most shelters that I work at. You see a little house, some bedding, bowls, and there's nothing too fancy at all. And this is kind of your more fancier shelter where you have more kind of a more living room, homey environment. But this, I reached out to my colleagues in the shelter medicine world, and I was like, show me pictures of the worst animal shelter you've ever been to. And they happily like sent me all of the photos that they had. They're like, and I'm like, you don't have to name names, but they're like, no, this is Jessup County. This is Jessup Animal Control in Wayne County, Georgia. You can say their name, I don't care. Which is quite a different attitude about this. I could not go onto a laboratory animal group and be like, show me the worst pictures of the lab you've ever worked with. Like, they would I would get blocked and banned. And I've tried this before, actually, so I know. I sent videos and I was like, tell me about this lab. How does this exist? And I was subsequently blocked and banned from that group for raising the question. So yeah, this is a bad shelter. Clearly, like, these cats are on grates. They don't even have litter boxes. And I clarified this with her. I'm like, they don't have litter boxes. She's like, no, they have to poop and pee right through those grates. And she went to the state vet and complained, and the state vet would have nothing of it. So this is an ongoing problem. She was actually, after voicing concerns, was never allowed back to this shelter. But if you go on their website, you can look. It's right there. I didn't add that lettering. They're like, this is where our shelter is. Quite open and honest. So if you have any problems with the way these animals are treated, feel free to go and protest. It's right there out in the open. They have their hours of operation. And that's the difference between some of these labs. Here's another bad shelter. Like, you have a giant lab stuck in this cage. Luckily, these animals are only there for a day or two. And Cindy Buckmaster, she is no animal rights activist. She is a proponent of the industry and regularly calls animal rights activists extremists and defends animal experimentation on her podcast. But she's great because I can talk to her. Like, she will talk to me on the phone. So I can ask her whatever I want. And I respect that, even though she is supporting the industry. But she wrote this article saying how this one company had repeated violations from the Animal Welfare Act and inadequate oversight, all the problems. This is over a 10-year period, was fined $4,600. Repeated violations, and she says the animal suffering described in some of these cases is appalling and heartbreaking. But she has the answer. She says she puts her faith in ALAC, saying that if this facility was accredited, this would not have happened, and accreditation should be mandatory for anyone getting research funding. But is this true? Let's see an example. This is an ALAC-approved facility. This is Ridgeland Farms, right nearby in our neighborhood. They say that, and this is a recent advertisement I took out of Lab Animal Medicine magazine a couple of weeks ago. You will notice there's no address and no phone number on the ad at all. This is one of the only ads that don't have an address or phone number. But they say they adhere to the strictest standards of quality in breeding, socialization, and health care and colony management. The Ridgeland Beagle has earned its reputation of superiority. They also tout intense socialization. So trigger warning, I'm going to show you some videos of what it looks like inside there. You will see dogs in cages. That might be disturbing to some, and they are quite distressed. And I want you to please share your thoughts while you're watching these videos. Let's see if I can start this. Having a beagle of my own, it's very difficult to see these dogs in horrible conditions. Yeah, it makes me so angry and sad to see how the little space was that they have. Yeah, they deserve better. And it's also incredibly noisy. I couldn't imagine how stressful that is for the dogs. I think some people need to take the perspective of what if it was your dog in there. I think then a lot of people would realize how unjust this really is. The fact that it is in Madison is crazy. They are desperate. I can't believe this is happening. It's right here in Dane County. Appalling. All I can think about is my sweet little beagle pup at home and how horrible this is. It seems like a prison. I can't imagine any human being defending this and calling the people who oppose it extreme. Yeah, it's like I don't really want to do this question. Yes, how do we feel about the housing system? I don't think anybody would say that this is adequate. And Ridgeland Farms, the owners are veterinarians, and in 2015, they netted $2.5 million. They have 15 employees to care for 4,000 dogs. And assuming that each employee works a 40-hour week, each dog only gets 1.3 minutes of care a day, and each worker has to care for 47 dogs an hour. And I know not all of the workers are involved in animal care alone. This is Julie. She was one of the dogs who was rescued from this facility. This is her now. She is blind and she does this spinning thing. I don't know if it's behavioral or neurologic. She seems to do it less now, but she always gives the impression that she can kind of see, because it's like, oh, she sees that couch and then she's gonna jump on there. She always seems to look at you in the eyes too. There you go. She sees the couch. But yeah. So these dogs, what's the difference between these dogs in this shelter and in this? They are a product, and it's secret. It's behind closed doors. So and these dogs are sold to labs. Do the labs who buy these dogs really know what it's like inside there? Do they know what they're purchasing? Are they willing to pay a higher price for dogs who are treated well? Or are they just going off of the reputation? Nobody has access to what it looks like inside these facilities. So I don't feel like researchers can really even make an adequate assessment of who they are purchasing and where they kind of came from. Would these research institutions be willing to pay more? At the end of the day, though, they are a product here for the benefit of those who are in power. So here's an ethical question that as we finish up. Is it morally acceptable to use non-human animals for invasive experimentation that would clearly be unethical if carried out in human subjects? Yeah, I mean, some people do say like if it puts humans at risk, but we did have a great talk with Jeremy Beckham, who's here, and I don't have time to go into all of the details about testing things on dogs. Maybe we have a little bit of time if you want to stick around. I can go in a little bit further. But when we test things on dogs for the benefit of humans, are we actually benefiting humans, or are we leading ourselves astray? Sometimes we actually do, by testing things on dogs first, we do lead ourselves astray. I can talk about that a little bit. And here's one more question I'll ask you too. Can the use of animal models reliably provide us with useful information about human disease pathology, as well as provide data to allow us to form good predictions for toxicity or drug efficacy? The FDA won't approve something without human trials first. You can to an extent. Viable for some things. Given the low rates of translation, false toxicity, and efficacy, positives and negatives, it's not reliable. Give a little bit more time if anybody else wants to say anything. But when you think about dogs, I mean, we all know there are certain things dogs are very sensitive to that humans are not. When being chocolate, you know, dogs have a different temperature than humans do. Dogs are very sensitive to things like xylitol, which causes hypoglycemia and liver failure in dogs, macadamia nuts. These are all things that humans can eat no problem. And there's many, many, many examples of drugs we have tried in animals first for safety that failed, but turns out they actually would be beneficial for humans. And then there are many things that were very successful when we tried them in animals, and then they hurt and killed human beings when we tested them. So we're often led astray in these things, unfortunately. And I think there is a better way, and if you go onto our website, look at Jeremy Beckham's talk, he goes over that in some detail. What kind of experiments are being done on those Ridgeland dogs? You can click this QR code, and I have a folder of all of the scientific papers done, not all of them, some of them, that specifically say that they purchase dogs from Ridgeland. So you can see, I'll go over a few of those if you're curious. And why, first of all, why we use beagles as an experimental dog? Much the same reason why a lot of systems in science persist. It's kind of just based on history and legacy. These were a favorite because of their size and docility, but there was a large number of stray and unwanted dogs on the streets, and so labs would just pick them up and breed them, and now we have beagles in labs. And this is from the early 1900s. You know, it's kind of a legacy brought over from that. Now we have all this benchmark data that we have on the beagle dog because there just happened to be a lot of stray beagles back in the day. One of the experiments was the effects of ingestion of various commercial detergent products on beagles and pigs. And this is a horrifying experiment that I don't think needed to be done at all. And they even mentioned like Tide, the brand Tide. And it's like, we still use Tide today. We didn't figure out how to make it less irritant. Another is the dogs, this is 2016, were force-fed an artificial sweetener. And the dogs who survived were euthanized after so that they can be looked at. So we're basically just killing dogs so that we could have another flavor that has low calories. I don't think this is a good use of animal lives. Another was inflicting compartment syndrome, which is like inflammation and pressure buildup in the muscles, in order to see if they can use a different laboratory data model for diagnosing this condition. And so they forced these dogs to have compartment syndrome by injecting fluids into their legs, and then 2 weeks later they were euthanized and their muscles were looked at. Another one was 30 beagles used in this experiment for rabies. This was it was 2006. Yeah, it's like we already have a rabies vaccine, but they were injected with the rabies vaccine and then challenged with the rabies virus. All were euthanized and looked at their brain to develop yet another rabies vaccine. Another one was salmonella, which isn't that much of a problem. The only dogs who have a problem with salmonella are racing dogs and dogs fed raw meat diets. Most dogs do not get sick from salmonella, only dogs who are really highly stressed. So these racing dogs, like mushers and greyhounds, get really sick from salmonella. And this racing association was the Kansas Racing Commission paid for this study for 24 to be used. 12 were vaccinated, 12 were unvaccinated, and all were infected with salmonella and then killed afterwards. Another not great use of resources. So yeah, I'll stop there because I'm going a little long, but this last slide is just things that are safe for humans that are clearly not safe for dogs. So any final questions you all have, feel free to ask. Yes?
The program that you seem to kind of help pioneer as an alternative, the access to care model, is that being more widely accepted as an alternative, or is that still being kind of dampened because of the barriers you discussed?
Yeah, it's definitely being more widely used. It is sad though, it's really, even my group, we're having a hard time getting information from schools about what they're doing and what their plans are for the future. Even when we call them up directly and ask, hey, do you do terminal surgeries at this school? Or we have students who are interested in only going to schools that don't do terminal surgeries. They call up these schools and ask because they want to choose their school based on these things. They often get the runaround, are not told the right thing. These students made the decision to go there because they were told that they didn't do terminal surgeries. So when I heard this, I know several vet students who then called and asked and went through 3 different gatekeepers and were told, no, we absolutely don't do terminal surgeries. Meanwhile, we have the syllabus right here that says that they are doing it right now. It is unbelievable. So yeah, I know some schools are moving away, but even the schools who are moving away, you would think they would be proud of it, but they don't want to suffer what Colorado State suffered, the backlash from industry. So there's a ton of secrecy around this whole issue, and we can't get any idea of who's transitioning and how fast and all of that. The only thing that we're able to hear from is individual students here and there saying what's going on. And unfortunately, we don't have ears and eyes in every single school yet. Yes?
Do veterinarians do internships? Is there any on-the-job where they could learn this stuff, or does it has to be done in the school?
Oh yeah, no, we get to go, in our 4th year, different schools are different, but in our 4th year, we get to go to different hospitals and practice, or I volunteered in the shelter, and yeah, this is how, even when you're a veterinarian and you are out, how you learn any new surgery is you find a vet who's doing that surgery and you shadow them and you follow them and they walk you through. That's how I learn any new surgery that I want to learn. If I want to learn how to do TPLOs or something, I have vets that I go to who help me learn it and walk through, and I go to continuing education courses where we do practice on cadavers, and we also practice on animals who need it. So, yes, Marina.
Hi, thank you, Crystal. That was really informative and horrifying. I had a question about this issue of like researchers who are working on alternatives to animal testing not being taken seriously, or like not being, rewarded for their contributions. Because it seems to me that like even if you're a person who really believes animal research is necessary and tells us something, like surely we should all be able to agree that we want to be able to get to a world where it's not needed at all. But is that like, why is that not the case?
Well, I mean, universities, I think it's like when they get grant funding from like the NIH, and the NIH gives what, 40-something billion dollars to research, $20 billion to animal research specifically. When that grant money goes to universities get 40% of that as like covering overhead. So they have an interest in continuing getting that money, and the researchers who are in these schools too, they feel threatened by these people doing alternatives to animal testing. That there's this whole industry that's built around animal use, from the cages, the equipment, the restraining devices, just billions and billions of dollars in all of this infrastructure to continue animal testing. And there's a culture around it too. And just like the barriers to switch away. It's hard, it's that institutional inertia. It's hard to change something once it gets going. So, yeah. Anybody else? Yes?
How do you think IACUGs can be strengthened to be better advocates for lab animal usage?
I think we need to adopt, this is what they did in humans, like follow what has been done in humans to advance ethics. And one is the Belmont principles, and that's something that a lot of people are looking at, how each animal needs an advocate, and who is somebody who can be that animal's advocate, and understanding that those who lack power, who lack a voice, should be given extra special consideration. Just like children, how we treat children, infants, people who are mentally ill. We need to test new vaccines and drugs on children. How do we do that ethically? And we make sure that they have an advocate who is working for their best interest. But I mean, we could have a 2-hour-long discussion or more week discussion on that. There's so many ins and outs to what that would look like in the future. But it's exciting to think about, and it's sad that we're not talking about that in veterinary schools, because that should be something we're talking about on a regular basis. And we should be like that 40% that is going to these universities, a portion of that should be set aside to develop alternatives. Like that's something that should be, invested in, and it's just not right now. Anybody else? Yes?
I just wanted to make a quick comment on a point made earlier about alternatives to animal models, because I think I'm a graduate student at Madison, and I work in a lab that uses organoids.
Uses what?
Organoids, which are ways of modeling organs using like stem cells or other cell types. So you can make a model completely synthetically without ever producing. Taking an organ from an animal would be the alternative, right? And I think that alternatives like this are actually one of the most hot button fields in at least my field of biology right now. So I would say that there are definitely alternatives being developed, and it's a really, at least in some areas, is a really exciting and promising field of research. So just to be a little bit more optimistic.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome that you're working on that too. That's amazing. Yeah, I've heard such great things about that area, and I need to spend more time researching it too. So, but thank you all for coming. Please go to ourouters.org too if you want
thanks to Dr. Heath again too. We really appreciate her spending her time with us tonight, and I'm just really struck at her leadership in the field and how much she's bringing about change. So if you could all thank me and thank Dr. Heath again with me.